Hey everyone, welcome to another live stream from me, Chris, on It Had to Be Said. As usual, I'm going to be talking a bit about what it is I want to talk about, and at the same time, I'll be reading your comments and questions, anything like that. Anything you're interested in asking, I'll answer for sure. Today, I wanted to answer a question that's been put to me, but like to a lot of people at the same time. Is there a reliable, unbiased news source where you get your news from? In what's up? In most people's cases, the answer is no, because there are no truly, fully reliable, objective, unbiased, whatever that would even mean, unbiased, if it was impossible to have bias or something. Um, there are no such news sources in the world. It's basically impossible. Now, there's a few things to bear in mind, because on the one hand, you could certainly say that some are more reliable than others. That's for sure. The thing about a good news source, though, is that you can't tell what's going to be true before you turn it on. So anything you hear is going to be influenced by bias and lack of information, and well, a lot of different factors. I mean, you can read about how who makes the news and how they make it. You could read about propaganda. You could read Noam Chomsky, manufacturing consent. There's a lot of stuff you can read to really get deep into it. I think when you're watching the news, there's a few things that you need to do. One thing is, you want to know what the purpose of the news is. Okay, in the sense of things like the corporate media, which is most of the news and the newspapers that we consume, on the one hand, their job is to make money, but it's more than that. It's also to promulgate a specific worldview about that paints things like capitalism and authority and so on as necessary and good. And there's not going to be much that look, in media like that look at like the system itself. And even if you look at the media that you could say are maybe more reliable or just maybe more on our side. So for example, and I, to be fair, there are some like that. And so, for example, Democracy Now! But it still doesn't mean that everything they say is going to be true. It just means that they're going to report it with a different slant than the corporate news. And they're good that way because they often provide, even if nothing else, they provide perspective that the corporate media tend not to. They don't, what's the word, uncritically consider what the police or some other government spokesperson said. So it's not total government or corporate propaganda. And the other thing you should do is, if you really want to know about an issue that's going on, it's really important for you to have some kind of understanding of the issue, of the whole issue itself, to really, even before you turn on the news. I think it's very important. An example of that, right now in the US, there's this big case, and I don't know how to pronounce the guy's name because I don't turn on the TV very often. I get my news from I'll explain that later, actually. But there's a guy named Ahmed something, and I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, and he was basically gunned down by a couple of people who were former cops and probably white supremacists. But But if you have no understanding of racism in the US, like if you don't really get how that works, then it, what you're going to see on the news might convince you that it wasn't a problem, that this is an isolated incident, that it was a good thing, something like that. Because um, I'll get to that. Because if if they, what's the best way to say it? Um, if you don't realize that there's a long history of white people publicly killing or lynching black people in the US, then you might think of it as an isolated incident. You might not notice the signs, that it's part of a system of white supremacy, that you can fit this murder into an overall pattern. You can also, if you know something about racism and the history, you can also understand the reaction of reactionaries and conservatives to this kind of news. One person said on Twitter, one guy named Roosh, I don't even know who that is. He said on Twitter something like, "Oh, there was just this one incident of killing black people, and the whole country, talks about it," and so on. I'm like, what? Happens all the time. It's just this one guy didn't know about it. He'd never heard about it, or he just ignored all the other cases. So, I don't know how to say your name, Nikram, maybe MC Nikram. Do you believe in spirits? Not really. I tend not to believe in things that I have no evidence for. Spirits is one of those things that we get told about in very vague terms. And, spirits and souls and stuff, I'm not really sure what that means and what I'm supposed to look for. Do I believe in them? I'd need a lot more information or philosophy behind them to understand them. Oh, that's cool. Yeah, it's a cool name for sure. Now, where are we? Okay, so the thing about, when you turn on the news, you want to know what it is you actually want to know and why. Because it's easy to just turn on the news on YouTube or TV or whatever, and just kind of sit there and let them tell you what's up. Let them inform you. And then you feel like you're informed. But I don't think that's a great, yeah, I know it's raw reality. I don't think that's a great way of approaching the news or something you really want to know about. Because again, you need to know the background of something to really understand it. And if you're learning about all these things without knowing the background, then you're ripe for misinformation or disinformation, which is lies, basically, or just misinformation, maybe just misleading reports, maybe leaving things out. Maybe that's all it is. And when and you'll know this probably already, because if you know stuff about some issue, you've probably watched the news report on it and gone, what? That's not true, or that's not how that works, or no, you're misrepresenting it or something. And now imagine what that would be like if you knew everything. You would watch the news, and everything you'd be able to point to as maybe propaganda or questionable, something like that. Again, they're always, the people they interview about a murder case, it's always the police. Well, why would we trust the police? Or a government spokesperson or a corporate spokesperson? I mean, these are not people you should be listening to at all. Like, not just you shouldn't be trusting them, there's really no reason to listen to them at all. Um, that's why you really got to understand the issues. Real journalism, in my opinion, is not about um, just reporting what the people in power say. How is that journalism? You could call that reporting, but it's not exactly a route to truth. It's more like a route to a very comfortable reality that you can choose instead of truth. If you want my advice on TV itself, throw it out the window. There's plenty more places you can get news. Now, where I get most of my news is actually from Facebook. Now that sounds like I'm just as bad as the others. Usually, the thing about Facebook is that you can customize your news feed. You know, like Twitter, all of them, whatever social medium you like. But I like Facebook because I've customized my news feed so that only like people and pages and groups that post things that I'm interested in are the things that I'm seeing. So I don't see, like I don't care about sports, so I don't know anything about sports news. I can't pay attention to it. I'm not. I don't know what's going on. Occasionally, somebody on my friends list, will post, "Oh yeah, that football game, blah blah blah," but otherwise, I'm not. I'm not exposed to it, so I don't know what's going on there. Whereas if it's something about like uh, the wars going on overseas, often the corporate news isn't posting about that, right? So or posting, I should say reporting. Sorry, but maybe some other news source is, and we tend to uh, have this need for an official kind of confirmation of something or an official report on something, and that's when we know that it's true. But a lot of the time that just doesn't come. So a good source of news is regular people like you and me. As long as we don't like lie or exaggerate too much, then we are just as good journalists as anybody else. What did you see? What's your experience? What's your perspective? And when you go on Facebook and Twitter, you see like so many, if you're in the right place on those websites, then you can see people really saying this is the issue, this is how it's affecting people. They can talk about what's happening in their lives. Now it's when you look at just the misinformation or disinformation on something like just this Ahmed guy who got gunned down, just that one thing alone on corporate media in the same country, you can look at all the disinformation there, then realize how much more you're exposed to when it's something about Iraq or Venezuela or North Korea, something like that. Like most of that kind of the places like that, if you haven't studied those things and studied them from various perspectives, not just some guy who wrote a book, um, you're you're not likely to be to have any idea of what the truth really is. But what you could do is in some cases you can find people on Twitter or Facebook or whatever who are from those places or who are reporting from those places who aren't part of the corporate media. And of course, you still got to think critically about them because they could be lying or whatever for their own purposes, or they could be paid off. It's always possible. But at least you've got the perspective of someone from that place to kind of balance the bias of corporate media wherever you're from. The conspiracy theories. Okay, that's good because that ties into what I'm talking about. I've noticed every time there's a major event, there are a lot of conspiracy theories that arise around that event. And the bigger the event is, like COVID or 9/11, for example, the more of these conspiracy theories there are, right? Now, now for sure, some people will denigrate any any assertion of fact by calling it a conspiracy theory, and those people are probably just closed-minded. Um, but but also there are a lot of these, a lot of this misinformation out there, and that's actually more, the internet and regular people than in the corporate media. They don't usually fuel conspiracy theories. It's usually just the people on the ground who are like, putting out websites and saying there's this one study by this one guy that proves that COVID is a hoax, or COVID is caused by 5G, uh, you know, terminals and stuff like that. Kind of thing is pretty silly for the most part. But that doesn't mean that there aren't any conspiracies. I mean, on the one hand, not on the one hand, let's say to start with, you could look at the entire ruling class as a conspiracy. That in itself is a conspiracy. It's people working together to systematically rob and oppress the rest of us. um, and they're not everywhere, yeah. How could that be what's causing COVID? Exactly, right? It's like you say. Um, but where was I? But these what was I saying about that? Anyway, it doesn't matter. Um, so there are absolutely conspiracies, and like I was saying, this ruling class, like there's conspiracies within the ruling class. There's a lot of like I understand why someone like Alex Jones uses the term false flag a lot, and why he says everything is a false flag, because there have been a bunch of false flags throughout history. Now, there's no evidence to suggest, as he does, that like the Sandy Hook shooting was a false flag. Like, yeah, it's okay to denigrate that by just calling it a conspiracy theory, because there's the only evidence is something that Alex Jones say, look at this document that I have that proves it, or something like that. That's just bullshit. But like um, the what was it exactly? The sinking of an American ship in the Gulf of Tonkin. Whatever exactly it was, maybe the second time that happened. That was pure conspiracy. The Bay of Pigs invasion and all the attempts on Castro's life, that was a conspiracy. And shit, you could even say that like the decision to like any decision, but like the decision to invade Iraq, for example, you could call that a conspiracy because a bunch of people got however many, got together and made the decision that they're going to do this. And I mean, it was a crime. And I don't mean in the legal sense, which you could certainly argue it was, but I mean it was a total crime against humanity. So you could call that a conspiracy. And really, actually, it's great that you bring up conspiracy theories, because we tend to put so much time. I don't mean we, but so many people will put in time into like believing in and promoting conspiracy theories, when really there are more important things going on, like again, like these wars, for example. You don't need conspiracy theories to explain these wars. You don't need conspiracy theories to explain why they gave trillions of dollars to big banks and stuff. You just need some kind of basic grounding in how capitalism works, and then you can understand it. And yet the conspiracy theories are out there. They're out there with these different priorities. They're looking at like 5G towers and like everything, all kinds of nonsense related to COVID. There are bigger fish to fry, you know. Um, Was Donald Trump a better fit for president than Hillary? They're both terrible, terrible people. Certainly, a lot of people that I know, living in Canada, everybody would have said that Hillary would have been better than Donald Trump. Just like right now, they're saying Biden would obviously be better than Trump. I'm one of those people who'd be like, it's hard to know what exactly would Hillary have done in office. Would she really have been that different from Trump? Maybe. Would she have been that much better or worse? That's not clear. Same with Biden. Is it clear that he would be better? No, it is not clear. And people keep telling me that as if you'd have to not be able to see or hear or understand anything to be able to see that Joe Biden is obviously superior to Trump. No, it's not obvious at all, and they could try to prove that to me if they like, but there's really um, they'd have to be very specific. Mostly, it's just guesses. They say like, well, if Joe Biden would appoint a better person to the Supreme Court, would he? Who says? Because he's a Democrat? That's just wishful thinking. Um, okay, so just going back briefly to kind of finish off what I was saying about the news and and how to judge for a reliable news source. A couple more things that I want to say about that, and then I'll be done. Um, for one thing, I think when I'm talking about news sources, I also want to talk about documentaries. I hear people talking about the news and documentaries as if they're talking about an objective truth. But documentaries are just as biased as the news is, and really, I mean, documentaries are more what they might call infotainment. A lot of, some of them are going to be true and factual, and some of them are just going to be bullshit. Yeah, exactly. There's no news source that's really fully reliable that way. And documentaries are the same. You really shouldn't expect truth from it necessarily, because some of it's likely to be true, but you don't always know what. I think it was, I forget who it was, some corporate magnate said something like, we're wasting 50% of our marketing budget. The problem is we don't know which 50% is wasting. And I kind of see, the news or almost any source of information as like that. 50%, and of course the number is arbitrary, but 50% of it's not true, but you don't know which part of it's not true. And as I've said here, the danger, as I said in an older video, the real danger isn't so much that it's not true, but that it kind of normalizes the system that we live under, that everything is kind of normal. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you can't get everyone's perspective. That's right. Yeah, it's pretty tough. Um, you can do better than just getting like a corporate spokesperson's perspective, but yeah, it's impossible to get the full picture of everything. And that actually, I'm glad you said that, because that leads to the last thing I was going to say on this point, and that's about just living with ignorance. It's okay to live with ignorance. It's okay to be ignorant, and for the world to be ambiguous, and for the facts to not be fully, completely clear. It's kind of what I talked about in my video about 3 weeks ago on the illusion of control. We don't need to know everything that's going on. And I think that need, that desire to know everything is part of why people watch the news in the first place. They watch and they go, great, now I'll get some facts. I can add those facts to my worldview. I think that's the wrong way to approach the news. Again, look for try to understand the issue first. Get as much background on it as you can, and then when something comes on the news, then it'll be easier to pick it apart, to maybe say, okay, that part might be true, and that part I know isn't true, maybe because somebody said something, um, or because I already learned about it, and it's part of a pattern. Yes, exactly. Put various stories together and you get some kind of image. Yeah, yeah, that's absolutely right. You get some kind of image of what's going on. Just don't assume that it's like that's the way the world necessarily is. We have this desire to want to know, and it's good. Curiosity is basically good, right? But but don't let up in your curiosity. If you really care about an issue, don't just kind of assume you have the facts when there's so much more you could look for. And anytime there's stuff that you really have no idea, again, maybe it's ambiguous, maybe you don't know, maybe there's no way to know, or maybe you think you need all kinds of information before you can really know something for sure. um, it's okay to be ignorant. We're all ignorant about most things. um, and you know someone like me, I talk about politics. I know some things about politics, but I mean, I'm also quite ignorant on the subject because there's so much to know. So it's good, but because I've spent so much time studying it, I have a better idea of where the limits of my knowledge are. But the thing I like most about it is being able to pick out the kind of the lies or the half truths, or recognize propaganda and misinformation when I see it. Yeah. And yeah, you're right. It's you want to look at all the different stories, all the different perspectives that you can find, and again, maybe never quite be sure about what's really going on. Great. So I think that's about all that had to be said for now. If anybody has any questions or comments in addition to this, then I'm happy to answer them. I give you 30 seconds to type them out. Otherwise, we'll be done. Uh, yeah, yeah, yeah. It's all true. Yeah, yeah. It's great to have you here. Okay, great. Yeah. Okay. Looks like we're all done for today. Thanks everyone for coming. Great to have your comments and your questions. And I'm not sure when the next live stream will be. Might not be until next week. We'll see. Otherwise, have a good day. Have a good week. Try not to get sick, because we're all in this together, right? Sort of. Have a good one. Bye.